welcome to the deep dive.
Uh,
When I first saw we were diving into Socrates, I have to admit, I thought, ancient Greek philosopher? Okay, this is going to be a tough one. But
yeah.
then the more I dug in, the more I realized this guy, he was onto something. Like his ideas, they still matter today.
What I find so fascinating about Socrates is he wasn't some stuffy academic writing these obscure treatises. This was a guy who took philosophy to the streets.
Seriously.
Oh yeah, engaging everyday Athenians in these really lively debates about, the big questions, life, meaning, all of it.
So, like, picture yourself in the middle of the Athenian marketplace.
Right.
You're haggling over olives, and suddenly, bam, you're caught in a philosophical debate
That's exactly it.
about justice or virtue or...
That was Socrates. He was all about that. He believed that true wisdom, it wasn't found in some dusty scroll. It was in that messy, vibrant exchange of ideas.
Okay, but how do you actually get people talking about this stuff?
Well, his method of choice, relentless questioning. He was like an intellectual gadfly, constantly prodding people, challenging them to examine their beliefs, even if it meant making them a little uncomfortable.
I can see why they called him the gadfly of Athens. But honestly, part of me wonders, wouldn't it be kind of annoying to have someone constantly poking holes in your arguments?
It definitely could be. But here's the thing. Socrates, he wasn't in it to win arguments. This wasn't about his ego.
Right.
He genuinely believed that by challenging assumptions, by exposing the flaws in people's thinking he was helping them, all of us, actually get closer to the truth.
So it was more about sparking a process of self-discovery than proving a point.
Exactly. He believed that the unexamined life, one lived on autopilot, without that questioning, that reflection, it wasn't truly worth living.
And that's where his famous Socratic method comes into play.
Exactly.
All right, so for anyone who's a little fuzzy on the details, how does it work? Paint us a picture.
Okay, so imagine you're having a chat with Socrates, and you mention something you believe to be true, maybe about courage or justice. Now, instead of just giving you a lecture, he starts peppering you with questions. What exactly do you mean by courage? Or, can you give me an example of a courageous act?
Ah, I see where you're going with this. He's not giving you the answers. He's forcing you to come up with them yourself, right?
Yes, by thinking through the implications of your own beliefs.
It's brilliant when you think about it. I mean, no wonder it's still used today in classrooms, boardrooms, everywhere.
Absolutely. And it's so effective. It pushes you to move beyond just surface-level thinking and really grapple with the complexities of an issue.
But this commitment to questioning, to going against the grain, it came at a price for Socrates, didn't it?
It did.
I mean, his trial, that's a story I'm really curious about. What were the charges against him, and how did his own method of questioning, how did that factor into his defense?
Well, you see, Socrates' relentless questioning, it didn't always sit well, especially with those in power. Socrates, he was living in a very specific time and place, right?
Right, ancient Athens. It's not like they were known for being, like, super tolerant back then.
Well, and to really get the charges against him, you have to remember the political climate, what was going on at the time. Athens had just gone through, well, some major upheavals.
The transition from tyrannical rule back to a democracy.
Right.
Things were probably still a little shaky.
Exactly. And in that context, Socrates and his constant questioning of authority, it wasn't just seen as an annoyance.
It's considered a threat.
He was pushing people to think critically about their leaders, their beliefs, everything. Very subversive.
So it wasn't just about annoying the powers that be. It was about challenging the very foundation of this new democracy.
Precisely. And that's what leads to the official charges. Corrupting the youth, impiety, which is basically disrespecting the gods. His accusers, they claimed he was turning young people against traditional Athenian values.
Undermining the authority of the state.
Exactly.
It's like the classic free speech debate, right?
Right.
But played out in ancient Greece. So what did Socrates do? Did he try to defend himself?
Oh, absolutely. And true to form, he used his trial as an opportunity for one last, very public, very dramatic display of the Socratic method in action.
Oh, now that's what I'm talking about. So how'd that go over? Were the jurors, like, scratching their heads?
Kind of, yeah. Picture this. Socrates standing before the jury, and he's not begging for mercy. He's dissecting the charges against him, but with this laser-like logic and irony.
It must have been quite a show, the Athenian gadfly on trial for being the Athenian gadfly.
It really was a defining moment for him and for Western thought in general. Socrates, he argued that his accusers, they totally missed the point of philosophy. He wasn't trying to corrupt anyone. He was trying to enlighten them, to get them to wake up, to live more examined, more ethical lives.
Okay, but did it work? Did the jury buy it? Because, I mean, it's a powerful argument, sure, but going up against the establishment, that's never easy.
Unfortunately, no, the jury wasn't convinced. They found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death.
Wow. Talk about commitment. He could have easily toned it down, said what they wanted to hear, saved his own skin, but he chose to stay true to himself, even in the face of death.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes Socrates such an enduring figure, right? He reminds us that a life lived in fear of speaking truth to power, of standing up for what you believe in, that's no life at all.
It's inspiring and more than a little terrifying. It makes you wonder, are there times when we need to channel our inner Socrates a little more? To speak up even when it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the most powerful and enduring lessons we can take away from Socrates and his life, his legacy. This idea that each of us has a responsibility to think critically, to question those in authority, to speak out against injustice, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular.
To be that gadfly, to
Mhm.
challenge the status quo, even if we ruffle some feathers along the way.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that? I mean, it's easy to say, be more like Socrates, but how do we actually put these ideas into practice in our everyday lives, our work, our relationships, all of it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think there are a few practical takeaways from Socrates' life that we can apply no matter who we are or what we do.
Okay, give us the Socratic life hacks. I'm ready.
First and foremost, embrace the power of questioning. Don't just accept things at face value. Ask why. Challenge assumptions. Look for different perspectives. Whether you're at work, in class, or just hanging out with friends, this habit of inquiry, it can lead to incredible insights. Really.
It's like bringing that Socratic curiosity, that critical thinking to every part of our lives.
Exactly. And it's not just about asking questions of others, it's about turning that questioning inward. Make self-reflection a regular habit.
So channel our inner Socrates and put ourselves on trial.
In a way, yes. Honestly, examine your thoughts, your actions, your motivations. Ask yourself the tough questions. Why did I react that way? What are my blind spots? Am I living in alignment with my values? This kind of self-reflection can be uncomfortable at times, sure, but it's essential for growth.
It's easy to go through life on autopilot, to just accept the status quo, both internally and externally. Socrates, he reminds us that a life well lived, it requires constant questioning of ourselves and the world around us.
I couldn't agree more. And this ties into another key takeaway from Socrates' life leadership.
Okay, this I'm really interested in. We've talked about Socrates as a philosopher, a gadfly, a champion of self-examination. But what about Socrates, the leadership guru? What can we learn from him about how to be better leaders ourselves?
One of the most powerful lessons Socrates offered leaders, it's the importance of humility.
Humility. That's an interesting one. It seems like we often associate leadership with confidence, charisma, maybe even a little bit of ego.
Oh, for sure. And those qualities, they have their place. But Socrates, he reminds us that true leadership, it often starts with acknowledging what we don't know.
Right. I know that I know nothing. It's a paradox, but it's also incredibly profound. So wait, are you saying that good leaders should, pretend they don't know anything? That seems a little counterproductive, doesn't it?
Not at all. It's not about feigning ignorance. It's about approaching leadership with curiosity, with a willingness to learn from others, with the understanding that the best solutions, they usually come from collaboration and open dialogue, not from someone dictating from on high.
So a Socratic leader is more of a facilitator, someone who creates a space where people feel safe to share ideas, to challenge assumptions, and work together to find the best solution.
Exactly. It's about fostering a culture of inquiry, where everyone feels empowered to contribute.
Leading with questions, not just answers.
Precisely. And this approach, it's not just for CEOs and politicians, it's relevant for anyone who wants to have more meaningful, more productive conversations in their lives. Parents, teachers, coaches, friends. Leading with questions, it can be incredibly powerful.
It's like, in a way, Socrates is kind of like the original disruptor.
Right.
Because he was challenging the status quo, he was asking those tough questions, and he was really making people think differently. And that's something that's still so relevant today, especially in a world where it's so easy to just go with the flow.
Absolutely. And it's not always comfortable to be that disruptor, to be the one asking the tough questions, to challenge the way things have always been done.
It takes courage.
It does. And that's something I really admire about Socrates. He was willing to stand up for what he believed in, even when it was unpopular, even when it put him at risk.
Yeah. And you know what? It's interesting because sometimes I think we can get so caught up in the idea of, being right, that we forget the importance of just asking questions.
Right.
Like, sometimes it's not about having all the answers, but about being willing to admit what we don't know and being open to learning from others.
I think that's such an important point. Socrates, he understood that true wisdom begins with acknowledging our own ignorance, and that by asking questions, by engaging in dialogue with others, we can start to chip away at that ignorance and move closer to a deeper understanding.
It's like that saying, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing.
Exactly. And the more I learn about Socrates, the more I realize that his teachings, they aren't just these ancient philosophical concepts. They're actually incredibly practical tools that we can use in our everyday lives to be better thinkers, better communicators, better leaders.
So as we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts on how we can all incorporate a little bit of Socrates into our own lives? Like, what's one thing our listeners can take away from this deep dive?
I think the most important thing is to cultivate that spirit of inquiry, to never stop asking questions, to challenge our own assumptions and the assumptions of those around us, and to remember that the goal isn't necessarily to find the right answer, but to engage in a process of continuous learning and growth.
It's about embracing the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, if we can all channel our inner Socrates a little more often, we can create a world that's a little more thoughtful, a little more just, and a little more open to new ideas.
I love that. Well, on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the life and legacy of Socrates. It's been enlightening, to say the least.
It really has. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, remember, keep those questions coming and keep diving deep.